What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It is your boy Ronnie Skelton II, also known as King Majora. Damn, son, where'd you find this? So, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to convey a theory based upon heavily documented research. More than a theory, it's more or less out in the open now. Basically, because I don't go into what I know about the JQ, the Jewish question, without. I mean, I can look at it and I've understood it in a form that is so nuanced that I don't involve all of Jewish diaspora. And if you are Jewish, please understand that I understand the nuance, and everyone's religions tend to have a more, crazy view. I'm not willing to just single you out. But I want to let you know that what you may perceive as Jewish outreach within Chabad Lubavitch is nothing more than a front of radical extremities that rely heavily upon the infrastructure built upon basically what the Zionist Federation and the Rothschilds basically maneuvered through the British, through when they had the annexed land of Palestine, and the Balfour Declaration, which basically gave all this power to the Zionist Federation to basically orchestrate a ethnic, cultural styled nationalistic cult that basically has its bedrock in understanding within those such as the early Zionist revisionist leaders that were big, that inspired the Likud party, such as Vladimir Jabotinsky. He had his Iron Wall speech, and I spoke about this in my Why is Israel Doing It video, Red Pill. You can check that out on my channel. And basically, this group, and for anyone who doesn't know, Chabad Lubavitch is a radical, pretty much operating in itself very much identical to what we would call Islamic terrorism, but just with Judaism attached to it instead of Islam. The type of things that they do, with the levels of extremity that are tied to them and their financing, and the peoples that are, for example, having their ways within the Trump administration. You've got Jared Kushner, friend of Chabad, his little network when he was in college and his Ivy League schools, and the networks all tied to Trump because of his failed casino venture and the very Jewish real estate elites of the tri-state area, which connect to the Brighton Bay Soviet Jewish connection mafia racket. They are in themselves a form of Jewish Russian mafia. They were exiled from the Soviet Union. You've got the connections with the Stern gang and the radicals. These types are just radical groups that they blend in with a lot of the Bolshevik communist views of certain atheistic, more political aspects of bloc style Judaism and what they do. And the whole problem with this is that these radical types are combined at the hip with the Zionist Federation Rothschild network of his philanthropy and his banking tycoons. The business itself of banking. We don't even have to get into Babylonian money magic and the concept of what are we truly bartering with, which is debt notes. And I got this this playlist called Research on my YouTube where it goes into all of that type of stuff. But I digress. Basically, a sector of Jewish people, which, let's be honest, this was, even according to the 90s data, it's not much changed since then, that basically they are less than 3% of the population in America. Of 30, was it, no, what is it now, 36, like 3 million now almost, somewhere around there. And, the Jews are less than 3% of that, but hold so much power by statistics. We don't have to get into hatred. I know Jews, I know a few. I know they're not all psychopathic boogeymen, but there is a radical group of suicidal, cultural suicidal, and ethnically suicidal elites that if you follow the train of logic in history, every time the Jews get exiled for the same reasoning that's becoming apparent with the Great Noticing, they always survive. They don't have to go through any troubles because they intermingle with the Europhile elite. And then they become a cyclical pattern within governments where this elite class become parasites, and the greater diaspora of Jews basically divides into Jews who agree with it and Jews who don't. And the ones who don't agree are very rarely ever promoted. And they have a culture within themselves to be at least somewhat basic, very basically knowledgeable in Torah ideology and some of the rabbi teachings. But the fundamental nature of the Bible that I've went into, such as the monotheism deception and Elohim, the non-human intelligence among us, that basically, the Bible itself, the Tanakh, and some of them don't accept the full Tanakh. Some of them do just Torah and Talmud. But, the Tanakh itself is considered a canon reading material for a lot of Jews in their religions. And I know there's many types of Jewish religions, from Reform to Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic, and Sephardic, and communistic, and international Jew communist types, etc. Okay? But you got to understand that the very foundations of the text itself supports henotheism. It does not support monotheism, and that absolutely matters when discussing Yotevavhe, the Tetragrammaton, because a lot of what Jews depend upon for their chosen one status, relies upon the Christian continuity and the ideas that basically they control Esau and Edom as Yakub or Jacob, and they have to basically theft it from us and claim the right under the Elohim. And I think that it's understood within these types of Judaism because I am as plurality. It doesn't take too much study within their Yiddish and Hebrew to understand that it's talking about multiple deities of the region. And, it's actually debatable if Yahweh was even considered one, the pantheon of what is basically a Sargon of Akkad's daughter and the other types that have basically formulated the pantheon that existed in the cuneiform tablets of Sumer and Akkadian and Babylon, where the Jews were exiled, and they had the Babylonian Talmud, and where they learned a lot of what they came to have as their cultural mythology, because it basically gave them the area because they were in that captivity. They have the Bible itself lifts from many of these older texts, and basically to make a long story short, they have this story where it's like the Tetragrammaton, Yotevavhe, is some form of emanation. Each letter is like a consonant. Letter is an emanation of creation itself, the monad and its functions relating to the Jewish people. And their Moshiach ben David, or whatever they're going to call it, Shiloh, is their Mashiach, Eshkatan Mashiach, that's like a line of light energy through the creation that in itself is like a deity within the pantheon of weird quasi-monotheistic Judaism, where they have this weird thing about Samael, a adaptation of the Satan prosecutor mythology, kind of with the agnostic movement and the serpent inversion, going into the whole nature of Samael controlling the Edom or Esau or whatever the hell they think about white people and Mars and Sephiroth trees. It all doesn't matter, because if you're going on what it's historically based on, you have what? The Sashu of Yahu. You've got some places where it says Yahweh and his Asherah. You have certain little totems and things of that nature dedicated to Yahweh as a Iron Age war, fertility, rain deity, and basically an amalgamation of Baal, Hadad, and El, and some of Anu from the earlier traditions. He's like a nationalistic deity for like how America had, United States had Columbia. Jijinka, or whatever they call them in Japan, the little tulpa like personification energy goddess, like Roma for the Romans, Britannia for the British, But that matters because in these people's minds, the people are, with the great noticing, they are preparing people to learn, and people are learning about the Jewish diaspora. I've studied this, like, Johnny Gat, Vigilante Intelligence, and if you know that name, you know that I know what I'm talking about. People of that era, they all had a falling out. You had people like Christopher John Bjerknes, Adam Green of No More News. Everybody kind of just went in their own fractured state. They all started to fight each other, and it fell apart, their movement of trying to express the JQ. And they got infiltrated by the Alexander Dugin types that infiltrated the alt-right. But the point being is these people want the Jewish diaspora to be radically hating the nations, or goyim, and they want them to be seen as inferior. They see themselves as the original Adam, and everyone else is like a Nephilim hybrid or a monkey dog shit hybrid, and their weird supremacist Talmudic teachings. And that goes into contexts of like the theories of every name in the Bible has to do with a variation of human condition. And, they may have their points to that, but I think that when it really boils down to them, where they believe that the world will exile the Jews due to revelation of what they do to people, and they're more, when these more radical types, because not all of them are that way. You've got people like Alan Sabrowski, the Army War College headquarters Marine Corps, who he often says Israel did 9/11, and they're going to get wiped out for it. There's other people they're just not every one of them's a villain. But that's the problem. The suicidal Jewish elites do it every time. And this time they have, like, for example, the Talpiot program, the Unit 8200 Shin Bet elite, cybersecurity, all of the top corporations and cyber are still headquartered in Israel. The backdoors into Intel chips and the spy apparatus and their blackmail operations with those such as Jeffrey Epstein. They plan to use an AI-based, AI God, more or less, service to basically enforce, the ideas of Gideon that were brought up, Project Gideon, the weird law enforcement AI super, minority report level bullshit. That's what they want, because they know that they have a problem with the lack of a true monotheism in the chosen status. Because if you really think about it, if you actually know the Bible like I do, and scholars like Dan McClellan, Mauro Bellino, other people, these people have, they clearly show you that, there's more than one Elohim. They may have eventually formed a monotheism, but the Tanakh in its truest form is speaking about the Canaanite plurality, the pantheon, and they're not just false idols. That's rhetoric from Rome and Second Temple Judaism onward, Greco-Roman era Judaism, Hellenistic evolutions, and how they eventually turned it into a weird quasi pantheistic, weird, mystical, Kabbalistic monotheism. And that's the problem. When they have the world based on their traditions before they can enact these Noahide laws, which are the Noahide laws are the laws for the nations, or the Goyim, or us. And they follow the traditional laws that were set forth, and they basically bring back the sacrifice and the original tradition, and they basically bring about the Bible. I see the Bible like a grimoire that can summon Diablo, but most people think it's a holy relic or a bunch of holy bullshit. They never see the in-between. Notice how you don't see any skeptical atheists who always have the same weirdo leftish tinge with their weird commie values. They never talk about the plurality in the Bible. And don't you think that if you're going to use an argument against a believer, it should be to explain the plurality? It's not a royal we. It's not just the Trinity. There are so many reasons as to why it is the pantheon that the Bible takes place within. The Canaanite region, the Judean and Israelite kingdoms, and how they actually had their deities. And the Bible even shows them going back and forth between Elohim. Mauro Bellino counts, I think, like over 20 Elohim separately mentioned in the Bible itself to be distinct. Talking about Shemash, Astarte, Baal Hadad, Yahweh. Asherah. They're all the Mot. They're all the same deities of the region, and they're not just false. So why that matters is if the world is united by these or against Israel for the Habadnik radical types that basically have Netanyahu, Ben Gvir doing the Gaza destruction, the slaughtering of people in the West Bank, the regions, the Palestinian conflict, the Gaza, the now Iran conflict, the what Israel's going after. The Netanyahu's even said at this point that they're doing Oded Yanan. You can look at the Rabbi Fishman map talking about their greater Israel and what they were already planning to do. I brought up earlier Vladimir Jabotinsky and, the Iron Wall speech, how they clearly had no intentions of having a dual state where they have cooperative understanding, and they understand that the Arabs know that, and they don't think that they're fools. It's just that the whole world has to think that it's a different type of ball game, but they're both radically insane. And, I brought up Johnny Gatt of Vigilante Intelligence. He brings up the connections that are intermingled between both Iran and Israel and Russia. And when you connect the culture poisoning and the Cold War, it all begins to make sense. And a lot of the weird tendencies to try to evoke a greater Israel, big Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem, big Israel project with the Ukrainian Kiev project, They want basically to revive the Soviet Union in a form of radical Judaism that has the area of Greater Israel maps. You can look that up. It's like the Levantian Middle East region connected to the Kiev and Ukraine and part of what was originally the Soviet bloc, and they want to evoke an ethos of Khazarian flavored, basically by their own traits. And I'm not saying it's all just the Khazarian Ashkenazi myth, but what I'm saying is when you look at the Jewish population of what was Khazaria and the region of Kiev, Ukraine, and the political connections of the Eastern European Jews, they clearly want to bring about a Messianic age where they bring about the old school Bible, but it's flavored by the pantheon of choosing a chosen one of these particular varieties that are claiming lineage from the biblical characters. I don't think that there is I think they've intermingled and sprinkled throughout all of humanity at this point. I don't think that the biblical characters should be considered a family that really kept themselves truly in line and very uniquely like they claim. I don't think that they do. Because the nature of the books and the many writers, I take the approach that the Bible has the many writers approach over time. Bringing up Isaiah, and all the other formations of the biblical books by anonymous authors over a period of time, expressing mythical and old oral traditions now that they have written down. But when they unite the world against them, the problem is they won't have an Elohim to protect them like their biblical prophecies claim. And if they can't afford to, if they can't pull off their Talpiot program technocracy bullshit, then basically they're screwed. And the ethnically suicidal elite Jewish class do this every time. The Jews get exiled, somebody tries to kill the Jews and exile them. It's just going to keep rinsing and repeating, and I feel kind of bad for regular Jews who don't really do all the comically goofy shit. Maybe their religion as it is fucked up, but so is everyone else's religion. But you few Jews who may be watching that really don't have a beef with anybody, I feel bad for you because your elites will use you as a puppet, basically as a piñata for others to look at and point to corruption where there is genuine corruption from their stench. And basically, what are you going to do? There in Iran, there are Jews in the council. I'm not someone who just blanket blames everyone, but you have a real problem with your ultra-nationalist Hasidic groups that intertwine with the Zionist nationals. I'm not blaming you for having an Israel. I don't really care, but you have to recognize that it's suicidal. And the elite Jewish class know this, I feel. And I feel that they're having their lower classes who feel there's something that can be done with the Talpiot program, the artificial intelligence, but really the ethnically suicidal elites of the Jewish type, they know. And they're going to survive. They're going to find their ways out and intermingle with the Europhile elites that connect to the non-human intelligence that I've discussed, connecting to the Bible with the, my video Elohim, the non-human intelligence among us. Basically they'll have their way out, but at the cost of every other Jew, basically. And it rinses and repeats like it did throughout history. And I kind of feel bad for the ones that don't do anything, so it's just the way it is. And unfortunately, those Jews who have always disagreed with the more Machiavellian, megalomaniacal tendencies of their elites and their more radical brethren, what can you do? So be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're at, and I will catch you all on the next one. Damn, son, that's it.